The Supreme Court is in session and they are changing everything as we know it. We see globalism right now is literally falling apart. The WEF is crumbling and the U.S. is going back to the gold standard, or else there could be a civil war. Well, these are some of the topics that we are going to talk about today with returning guest Tom Luongo. Now, Tom is a geopolitical and market analyst. He's the publisher of the Gold, Goats, and Guns newsletter, podcast, and blog. More importantly, Tom is an out-of-the-box thinker, and he's able to connect dots that most people don't see. And, of course, he backs it all up with a very strong track record of making actionable calls on markets with uncommon accuracy. With a decade of experience as a newsletter editor and a contributor for Newsmax, Tom Luongo pushes the line between politics and markets with a lot of fun and brutal honesty. So let's go ahead and just jump in with Tom. Let's just jump in. Tom Luongo, sure. Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast, newsletter, a wealth of information, someone that I turn to regularly. I read your blogs, subscribe to your stuff, and everyone else should too as well. Right. So we're going to link to that down below. Gold, Goats, and Guns, the name sort of tells it all. We'll come back to why he's giving up the goat farming in a sense, but you've been on my channel multiple times, so listeners should know who you are. But let's just jump right into it, because about a year ago, I think it's maybe been since we've caught up. It's been a while. You've been sort of on the front end of a lot of these trends, and one of the things that we had talked about was sort of the growing administrative state, deep state, whatever we want to call that, and the tentacles that they've had in. And one of these things about this Chevron doctrine, and I think maybe we had seen that the Supreme Court was going to rule on that at some point, and that just happened. Now, there's a lot of different takes on this, so let's get your take on this. So the Chevron doctrine, the Supreme Court ruled on it. What are your thoughts on that?
All right. Well, the Chevron deference was handed down in 1984, and as far as I'm concerned, it's probably the most consequential. The repeal of it is probably the most consequential. Well, okay, the ruling itself was probably the most consequential advancement of the tyrannical state in the United States since Marbury versus Madison, or I don't know, maybe the Dred Scott decision. It was terrible. It literally unbalanced the three branches of government, such that the officers of the executive branch could tell the officers of the judicial branch, the judges, what to do and how to adjudicate and how to interpret laws written by the legislative branch, Congress, that didn't actually want to take responsibility for the laws that they wrote. So it drove an entire massive regulatory truck, down, right over all of our constitutional rights. And the courts were literally unable to do anything about it. They were forced to defer, and that's not the Chevron doctrine, it's the Chevron deference. You had to defer to the three-letter alphabet agencies or the five-letter alphabet agencies or whatever, and which, then sporify like mushrooms after a rainstorm, and that's what we've had for the last 40 years. Literally, it's the mechanism by which to turn the United States from a constitutional republic into an unelected technocracy, frankly, indistinguishable from the European Union. And as far as I'm concerned, good riddance. It's always been the thing that this is one of these things that's been sitting around in my back of my head for years. Dexter White and I, we've been friends forever. We've talked about how bad Chevron was. And he's the one who brought it up to me about a year and a half ago, that there were court cases winding their way through to make their way to the Supreme Court. Now, the last time you and I talked about it, and I brought it up, I said, the Supreme Court was supposed to adjudicate on this last summer, but they didn't. And I think the most important take on this is not that Chevron wasn't going to be overturned. Okay, it was when was the Supreme Court going to feel secure enough in its, in reality, not de jure, but in reality, de facto, safe enough to actually, hand down a decision like that, because it's literally going against the entire political juggernaut that is pushing the United States and the entirety of the Western world into this, schna of communism. And that's all it is. It's just communism. And which is the ultimate technocratic state, as my friend Alexander Mercouris reminded me of about 6 years ago. He's like, we were talking about this stuff, and he said, I started, going off in the EU, and he just reminded me, it's like the original technocratic state was the USSR. And all they're doing in Europe is trying to perfect it. And all they're trying to do here in the United States is transport it over here to destroy us in the process. And I'm sorry, this is clearly obvious to me from the day the WEF came out during COVID and said, you will, own nothing and be happy. That was their coming out party. That was their way of saying, we own you and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Now, every conversation that you and I have had, Mark, since the first time you had me on, which was, a great service you did me when you did, and we've had since then, and when I've had you and Alex on my podcast, and we've talked about these things, is that was there or is there the existence of a countervailing force within the United States power structure that would just say nuts to this? And what would be, and all I was thinking about was, well, what would the conditions be? What would have to happen in order to start that process? Well, clearly the only, the military industrial complex wants this. They love this. Congress loves it. Davos loves it. Everybody loves it until you get to a point where you realize, okay, the only people who can't make any money under Klaus Schwab's vision of the future are the U.S. banks. And so at some point you had to say to yourself, okay, everybody's pushing up towards their existential threat, right? The banks are looking at the destruction of the private formation of capital. The Defense Department is looking at the existential threat of having to fight Russia over swampland in eastern Ukraine and or other places around the world, and they're not ready for it. We're not ready for it. The whole country's just been hollowed out, conceptually. And Chevron was at the heart of this, not allowing any deviation from the bureaucratic path and the technocratic path. And I think that's why this is so unbelievably monumental. It starts the process of saying, you know what? No. And this is the interesting thing about what the Supreme Court said, and I'll turn the mic over in just a second, which is the following, which is it said, okay, the cases that have been adjudicated under Chevron aren't going to be overturned, but every one of them can now be potentially relitigated. Okay? Because Chevron should have never been in place in the first place. So it's not going to repeal any of this stuff. What it's going to do is going to force, on a case-by-case basis, all of this 14,000 cases that are out there, they can all be relitigated because all somebody has to do is find harm of that policy, and then the government is going to have to justify what they did without being able to use Chevron as their justification, and they're basically their just say no card.
Okay, so in a constitutional republic, we have a constitution that sort of a lot of people have this misconstrued, and they think that it sort of gives us freedoms or gives us rights, but instead it actually limits what the government can actually do. And the problem that we've seen escalated over time, but specifically through COVID, is we saw the government come in and make all types of rules and regulations. I'm in California, of course. Newsom tried to be at the forefront of that, and they put all types of crazy mandates, which who knows what that even is, right, in place. And then, I had arguments, and like most people around the world, maybe lost a lot of friends over this because all of a sudden you start to see who's on separate sides. And I remember specifically one conversation I had, and my neighbor was like, well, this is the way that our government works. I don't think it's against the Constitution. You do think it's against the Constitution. I was very strong about that, and he was strong in his opinion. And he's like, so it goes to the courts, and the courts will tell us, is this to the Constitution or not? And what we've seen, unfortunately, through the COVID stuff, years later, the court said, hey, what you did was unconstitutional. And so you couldn't have done that. Unfortunately, we have a couple years worth of damages. And in the case of the Chevron doctrine, deference here, I'm guessing that's what you're saying is sort of the same thing. The Supreme Court now has basically said, hey, look, you guys don't have this power. This is unconstitutional. You couldn't have done that. You shouldn't have done that. You didn't have the power to do that. However, the damage is done. And so what you're saying is it doesn't unwind all those things, but now a lot of these companies who do have damages, so the case specifically was a small fishing company or something like that. I mean, they had massive monetary damages, and so now they may be able to go sort of come back and relitigate that and maybe get some of that money back.
Well, they're definitely going to have to. They should absolutely under Chevron, the fisheries department or whatever. I don't know the exact four-letter agency. I don't remember the acronym. It doesn't matter. This $700 a day fee that they were charging for monitoring this poor company, like whatever fines have been racked up, like those go away. They're not going to pay them, and any fines or any not fines and or fees or anything else, they're not going to pay them because it's been overturned. And any fines and or fees that they've paid previously should be paid back to them, including all their legal costs and everything else. Like this is the way this is supposed to work. You don't get to it's like we've been living under this rubric of people with money and government with power get to just get to file suit against you for whatever. We just indicted Donald Trump on 34 charges of eating a ham sandwich for all intents and purposes. And yet this is, and I make a Murray Rothbard reference when I do that. This is, they just think we'll just overwhelm you with money, with the law, with legal problems that you can't afford to even face. And that's how we're going to keep you down. But then not only did they have that, but they also had the deck stacked completely in their favor so that there was no recourse to our rights. Like the constitutional republic fundamentally ended with Chevron. It was the final blow when you really stop to think about how unutterably tyrannical Chevron was. Unelected midwits with power at any random agency could feather their own nest. If you want to be like banally evil, you can have some third-class functionary over at BATF and just steal money, just shake people down. Well, it would be a real. It's just mafia stuff. It would be a real shame if your business went under because we levied a fine against you every day, unless you paid me $500. Like that's exactly what this was.
Yeah.
And it was so very freaking obvious. And so at the very least, what this really means to me is the following. As I said at the beginning, what changed to allow the court, who put off this decision for a year, what changed that finally allowed the court to say, you know what? We can rule on this and our children aren't going to be murdered. Because that's the reality of the situation. Okay? Like, for the last 4 months, they've been building a public case about why Sam Alito and his wife need to be murdered. All right? They were clearly laying out a path to activating Antifa to go after Sam Alito and Clarence Thomas. And now, after Chevron and the Trump immunity decision, they're all running around going, "Oh well, that gives Joe Biden the power to just off Trump and be done with it, and they can't do anything with it." I'm like, really? Did you fail third grade reading? Really? Did you fail reading Article 2 and Article 3 of the Constitution, where the president's enumerated powers are, or whichever article it is, I don't quite remember off the top of my head. But I don't see that as one of the president's enumerated powers. He can just legally, murder American citizens because he disagrees with them. He doesn't have that power. Last I checked, the king had that power. So these people are not only are they evil, they're stupid and evil.
Yeah,
and it just needs to end. We just need to look at them at this point and go, that's enough. You literally don't get to speak anymore. And we get to laugh at you and we get to shout you down because you people are done. This is wrong.
It's one reason.
And I'm done with the struggle. And I'm done with the struggle session, Mark. I really am. I'm just done with even caring about giving them, the benefit of the doubt on any of this. They're all just sick, evil, twisted fucking assholes. That's it. Done.
One of the things I've argued with, the attack on freedom of speech is that, they say, well, certain people shouldn't be able to say these things. But it's like, we kind of need them to say these things so we can see how evil they really are. And they're sort of showing themselves right now. I'll be honest, I was completely shocked. I told my wife some of the stuff, and she shouldn't be shocked either, but I told her some of the stuff that was coming out on Twitter, and she couldn't believe it either. I mean, literally, we have prominent people head of the BBC, calling for like the president to assassinate people, send in SEAL Team 6, I saw, right? Like, I mean, all of these things, I mean, like what? Like, where does this even come from? And the fact that they're able to say this stuff out loud is just, it's just unbelievable. It's amazing how far and how fast we've come in such a short period of time, especially when this is the group of people that are calling for the censorship of people because you might say things that might offend people. And now they're openly calling for assassination and murder.
Yeah. I know. Well, that's the thing. It's always been this way, and you're completely right. This is who these people always were, right? And the fact that they're now having to deal with the fact that we disagree with them, and we have we have like the legal standing now, and they just said, well, no, we just need to kill you all. Like, really, we always knew this is what you wanted to do. It's nothing new. We've always known this, and we're now. Thankfully, now you're just showing everybody who you actually are. I mean, Keith Olbermann has been telling everybody to just shoot everybody for years now, for all intents and purposes. And same thing with De Niro and all the rest of these rotten.
Yeah,
these
and
rotten
Eric Swalwell's, threatening Americans.
Swalwell and Adam Kinzinger and like Liz Cheney, and they're all scared to death of actually being. They know that they're guilty. They know that they have now been exposed. And now they're literally freaking out because for the first time, they actually have to fight on a level playing field. When before that, they always just got this, sit there and virtue signal their sagging tits off every day and tell everybody, doesn't matter if they're man boobs or otherwise, that, we are the keepers of the holy and you are not. And you are deplorable, outcast, and unclean, and you just have to take it because we don't have to listen to you. They never had to listen to us. And now you can tell that their overreaction, their histrionic, literal over-the-top reaction of, oh no, now it's okay to call for the murdering of the Republican presidential candidate, excuse me, or anybody else who is okay. We just need to start murdering everybody or pack the court or everything else. Why? Because it's just, it is who they've always been.
Yeah.
And they're now unbelievably scared because they know the jig is up.
Yeah.
And they know it's all going to roll against them, and they don't know what else to do.
Now,
so here we are.
We shouldn't be that shocked because, I mean, they openly called for everyone who voted for Trump to go through re-education camps. The majority of Americans should be re-educated. I mean, that was pretty extreme. So it shouldn't be so shocking, but it is. Some of the things that this Chevron doctrine affects, which is basically everything, every one of these government administrative states, you mentioned a few of them, are sort of now reeling from the effects. But some of them, specifically in regards to Bitcoin, we saw that there has been sort of the Biden administration has been utilizing some of these administrative companies in regards to the way that they use power, demanding Bitcoin miners to release information about how much power they use and things like that. And so sort of weaponizing the energy, the EPA against Bitcoin, and weaponizing the SEC against it at the same time. So do you think this rollback sort of really pulls back that press they've been putting on Bitcoin in regards to a couple of those agencies?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Without a doubt. And it's not just Bitcoin. Bitcoin's only one aspect of this. But of course, it's like everything else. Look, they always were going to use climate change as the means by which to browbeat us into giving up everything that we enjoy about living in the first world.
Right.
That was always the point. Right. Their goal is literally to replace us with AI and robots and all the rest of it, and then they can have a nice, simply controlled world, and they don't have to deal with the dirty meat space that is human beings, and that's fine. These are people who are disembodied left brains. If you follow Ian McGilchrist, they believe the model is the world, and then they believe that they can just create whatever reality they want and then impose it on the rest of the world. They won't be able to do that now. So they're not going to be able to tell us, we're going to be able to roll back and get light bulbs that don't burn out or make us crazy, like the LEDs. We're going to get toilets that flush and actually get rid of our waste. we're going to get cars that don't suck. Like, that's the first one. We're going to get cars that don't suck, which is what, and the car industry, I've been ranting about this for years. The car industry, it was at the epicenter. It was at the nexus point of all of these different mechanisms of control, because without a functioning auto and transport industry, you have no energy transport. Without energy transport, you have no food transport, no commodity transport, no commerce, no this, no that, no private banking, none of it. It all rests on the ability to transport goods and services and human beings to and where they need to go in order to turn what is into what will be. Like, this is basic economics 101. I hate to use that term, but we're dealing with communists, so we kind of have to go back to that, to the basics. So yes, so Bitcoin, they were absolutely coming at Bitcoin from like 4 or 5 different directions, not the least of which is, and by the way, this is going to sound like a criticism, but for example, as all of this is happening, a guy who I actually really like and would love to see take over for Ron DeSantis as governor of Florida, Matt Gaetz, putting forth the idea that Americans could pay their taxes in Bitcoin. What are you, out of your mind? That's like the greatest centralization of Bitcoin ever. Because what do they want to do? They want to block off all the whales who are sitting on all this Bitcoin that the government doesn't control. They want Elizabeth Warren to get past unrealized capital gains tax, force these people to sell, cut off all of their mechanisms by which to convert them back into dollars, so that they can pay their capital gains tax and pay everything else. No, they just just give us the Bitcoin. Yeah. Because then they control the Bitcoin, and then they can start controlling the protocol and they can start attempting to control the protocol. Not saying that they can, folks, for all the maxis in the audience. I understand how Bitcoin works. What I'm saying is, from their perspective, they think if they can control the Bitcoin, they can control the value of it, the price of it, and everything else. And in some ways, they're not wrong. And we all need to make our peace with the fact that these people are evil, and they have to think like them in order to figure out what they're trying to do. So Bitcoin was being attacked from like multiple angles, and I was like, no, Matt Gaetz, I'm not paying I don't consider it a privilege to pay my income taxes in Bitcoin. I think that's actually the dumbest thing imaginable.
Yeah.
But
good money drives out bad, and there's the opposite of that. And so you want to save in the good currency and spend the bad currency. So spend your fiat. It's why pre 65 nickels or quarters and dimes are no longer in circulation anymore. People have saved those and spend the post ones.
Well, dimes and quarters were the ones that
dimes and quarters
that were silver. It was only nickels were actually called nickels because they are 75% nickel and 25%.
And they no longer have nickel either.
Only for 3 years. It was only for 3 years during World War II that we actually produced silver nickels, because we needed the copper and the nickel so bad to fight the war that we didn't care about the silver. Yeah. It was fascinating.
But nickels are no longer nickel either. But I want to come back to this point that you said about why are they coming out now? Now, something I've been talking about since 2021 is how we are approaching peak centralization, and the pendulum is swinging back towards decentralization. And a lot of people, I talked about the blow off top of socialism, and a lot of people back in 2021 and 2022 are like, Mark, you're out of your mind. I mean, the WEF is getting more power, the BIS is getting more power, the IMF is getting more power. And it was, but I could already start to see the cracks, and that's what I was looking at, the cracks. But now it appears the dam is completely busting open. We see the sort of maybe the tide turning against Klaus Schwab himself. We'll come back to that. But coming back to the point, you said, do you think that the Supreme Court now feels secure enough to come out on this? So what does that mean? Why are they now secure enough?
It's a great question. And yes, the whole Klaus Schwab nuts and sluts thing coming out at the exact same time, even more prima facie evidence that I've been saying since 2021. As my partner Dexter White said it to me the other day. You called the shot in 2021 that Powell was off the reservation. You called the shot. You pointed at the short porch in Yankee Stadium, and then you hit the home run. I'm still like, okay, yeah, maybe, okay, but let's play this out. We're not here today if Powell doesn't implement SOFR during the Trump administration. If Trump doesn't put a whole bunch of circuit court judges in that are actually halfway reasonable during his term. Remember, those are really the only two things that Trump did other than keeping us out of war with Russia, which is a secondary point. But those two were probably, in hindsight, the most consequential things that Trump got done during his first term, during the first season of the Trump show. Because the courts set up Chevron, and SOFR sets up where we are today with interest rates and the money and everything else, and the capital markets. So the Democrats have always planned on getting rid of Joe Biden. Let's not kid ourselves. Okay. They understood, they've known, like we've known for years, that Joe was never going to run for re-election, or that they were going to have to figure out a way to get him off the stage. Biden and his family, of course, don't want to leave the stage because they are so corrupt. The only thing keeping them out of jail right now is the fact that he's president. Okay? So, of course, Joe Biden wants to continue being president of the United States. But so they set up this debate for the day before the end of Q2 in the capital markets, right? So Thursday night, Q2 is going to end on Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock, so that the world can see that Joe Biden really is decompensating faster than anybody ever thought. And all of a sudden, and I don't, for the record, I don't think the trolls at CNN were acting in the after
really
debate pity party. I think
that was the first time they ever saw that.
I think that they're told what they're supposed to do, and they actually don't watch anything. I think they see all the same clips that are sanitized and given to them. I really do, because the best way to sell the flip, the needle scratch of, oh my God, Joe Biden is insane, is for them to actually believe it themselves. I mean, if I were scripting this, if I were directing this movie, they would not be actors in that moment. I would have them be honestly shocked and have their mimetic collapse and their world completely change overnight, right?
Ben Hunt put out a piece, I believe it was Ben Hunt, Epsilon Theory, and put out a piece about common knowledge or general knowledge, and sort of talked about how everybody knows it privately, but nobody wants to talk about it. Sort of the emperor wears no clothes, so to speak. Everyone knew the emperor was naked, but once someone said it out loud, and then they knew that everybody else knew the same thing, then they could start talking about it. And that's maybe sort of like this, like everyone sort of knew Biden was like that. Obviously, some of us openly spoke about it, but some of them didn't. But once it was out in the open and then everybody saw it, there was just no way they couldn't talk about it, something like that.
Right. So that's the first part of the setup. And so we knew this was coming. It was on the schedule. And people have been asking me all day and all the last couple of days, like, why did Trump even, agree to this debate, knowing full well that, this is a setup in order to get rid of Biden? I'm like, because the best way for him to win is for him to let them show Biden for what he is. Let them attempt to replace him, and then watch the civil war within the Democratic Party as all 3, 4, 5, 6 different factions within the Democratic Party. And I think there's at least 3. Fight amongst themselves until we figure out who's gonna win. And this is exactly what Dexter White and I talked about in the latest issue of the Gold, Goats, and Guns podcast. We did this like on Sunday afternoon, and I put it out last night. So I think they knew it was coming. They knew what was getting set up, and the Supreme Court, right at the end of their session, then dumped everything on the market, everything all at once. And then the Wall Street Journal puts out the Nuts and Sluts campaign against Klaus Schwab. It's all coordinated. There are no coincidences here. Okay, and we've all been focusing on Chevron, right, and the Trump thing, and I didn't catch this. One of my patrons caught it, and he called me out, and he's like, "Dude, how could you miss this?" I'm like, "Because I'm busy, and life happens. Thank you for pointing this out to me." The Jackersey case about the SEC is actually almost as consequential, because there in that one, the SEC brought fraud charges against this hedge fund manager 10 years ago, and then and fined the crap out of him, and claimed that their administrative Star Chamber courts were good enough to, adjudicate against this guy. And the Supreme Court's like, no, that's a jury by his peers issue. And the legal decision on this is actually very interesting, because the SEC, and I'm not a constitutional scholar, so I'll get like the article and section numbers wrong. But they were trying to argue one section of the Constitution, the executive branch, versus the another article of the Constitution, which was enumerating like the legislative branch. And so they were trying to mix those two things together in order to get what they wanted, and they got away with it for years. Again, thanks to Chevron. So the two of those things together, really, that's the judo-esque, body slam, reversal, complete reversal. And so now all of a sudden, we actually have the possibility of getting government of, by, and for the people out of the court system because the administrative state has been, literally gutted, and now we can go back to a jury we can go back to trial jury, and they can't just, find us and take all of our money and bankrupt us all because, we looked at somebody sideways or we put out a mean tweet about Ursula von der Leyen, which this is the funny part about it. It's like we're at the point now where if we say mean things about European leaders, like they send people to our doors. They send the FBI to our house. Like, what the fuck is this shit?
Yeah.
Seriously. Like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm not allowed to say bad things about Guy Verhofstadt? I'm like, what? Why not? He's completely odious. There's not a thing about that human being that is in any way, manner, shape, or form redeemable. And yet I'm supposed to sit here and defer to him because he's a public figure? What are you kidding me?
No. Geet from the Netherlands?
Yeah, the Netherlands. That guy with the bad teeth and this horror. I want to literally like the perfect example of the odious Eurocrat.
Yeah.
Like he's like my pinnacle. I gotta get AI to give me some like Godzilla memes about him.
I want to come back to Europe and the EU, but just so you're saying that the Supreme Court finally felt safe enough to do this, and sort of in the fog of war, sort of at a time when the Democrat Party, which has been openly attacking them, threatening them even, right? We saw with the overturn of Roe v. Wade. I mean, actual physical threats and so forth. So at a time when now there's all this dysfunction in fighting, they figured now's a safe time because they're too preoccupied with themselves. Is that what you're saying?
No, actually, when I again get lost in all the details and wanting to like stand on my soapbox and complain about bloodless Eurocrats. No, the point being is that if you believe my argument that the Fed and our banking system is not down with the Comintern, then they have finally gotten the things together. They've got all their ducks in a row, and they finally tapped the SCOTUS on the back of the shoulders to John Roberts. Don't worry, we have your back. Take these people the fuck out. And what happened yesterday? The state of Florida unleashes all of the Epstein.
Yeah.
The documents that have been sealed for 16 years. Like, if this isn't all a major shot across every bow there is, I don't know what else to tell you. I mean, Mark, like you, I called peak Davos back in 2021. When they tried rolling out Omicron and it failed went over like a Led Zeppelin, I'm like, this is over. Yeah. This is only going to get worse for them from here because they've lost the illusion everybody's broken the illusion and it's collapsed and everybody's like, okay, I'm just over this shit now. I want to get back to work. And, it was just a matter of watching whether or not Powell could continue to drain them of their vitality, i.e. their Eurodollars that they levered up at 0% for 15 years. And then they'll watch Janet Yellen running yield curve control and all this other stuff. And it's just all what I've seen for the last 3 years is nothing but rearguard actions from them.
Yeah.
And their pivot is war in Ukraine and war in Taiwan and
war everywhere.
China and war
everywhere. All right, I want to take a break just real quick and say that, as we're talking about Bitcoin and digital assets, the question really comes down to are you tired of the global elites robbing you blind through, all this money printing that's happening? And if so, then you need to be holding your wealth outside of that. And more importantly, you should be coming to the Bitcoin conference in Nashville. The 2024 conference is happening July 25th through 27th. It's the largest Bitcoin, the largest fintech conference in the world. I've been going every single year. It's an amazing event, and Bitcoin 2024 really stands as a beacon of monetary freedom. If you care about that, if you care about freedom, all freedom sits at the freedom to transact. And really the darkening macroeconomic backdrop that's happening needs the Bitcoin more than ever. Now, there's going to be top speakers there, companies, thought leaders from across the industry. They're all going to be in Nashville looking ahead for the future. And I'm going to be there. Lots of other people, my friends, are going to be there. And ticket prices keep going up. So the longer you wait, the more you're going to pay. But I don't want that to happen to you. I'd love for you to come hang out, meet me, hang out with me and all the other speakers there. And you can save 10% on your ticket by using code MarkMoss at checkout. So get your tickets now. Like I said, the prices just keep going up. Use MarkMoss at checkout to save 10% on your tickets, and hit me up. Let me know if you're coming, so I want to meet you. And also, while we're talking about Bitcoin, we're talking about laws being changed to basically guarantee your rights of self-custody. The whole piece about Bitcoin that's so revolutionary is that we can custody our own digital asset. And so you should certainly do that. But how? I've been using this device. It's called a Trezor hardware wallet. I've been using it for about 7-8 years now. It's been my go-to device. Basically, it's a little hardware device like this that holds your private key, and you plug it into your computer when you want to send a transaction. I like Trezor because it's open source, unlike some of the security flaws you've seen in other devices. I don't want to name them right now, but it's open source, so you know that it's safe. It's the easiest to use, which I have used it forever. They have new devices that make it much easier than ever before. There's no excuse for you not to secure your own Bitcoin with a Trezor hardware wallet or something else like that. And more importantly, when you're holding your Trezor hardware wallet or any hardware wallet for that matter, you need to back up your private keys. Now, you want to make sure that you back up your private keys and put them somewhere they don't get destroyed. And they've come out with this new device where I can put my private key on this metal device that could withstand fire, flood, or war, whatever it may be. So check out Trezor, what they're doing. You can save 10% on these things by using code MarkMoss. But either way, make sure you secure your own Bitcoin. So, one of the only ways out of the situation that we're in, moving more towards a macroeconomic lens now. You talk about the Fed sort of weaponizing against the Euro system, if you will, the banking system. And just for everybody listening, if you want to know more about that whole thing, go back and listen to some of our previous interviews. I'm going to link them in the show notes down below because they're still relevant if you want to kind of understand this from a better level. But let's just say that in the situation that we're in right now with super high debt to GDP, unsustainable debt, fiscal spending is now dominating, whatever the Fed and central banks can do. And we're sort of the rock and hard place have continued to get closer and closer and closer. Maybe the only real way out of this is, super high inflation, right? If we can have enough inflation to push the growth level up. This is what I'm thinking. So maybe we have high double-digit inflation for 3-4 years. We push the GDP, the productive side, up a little bit, bring the debt to GDP balance back down a little bit. We have Biden talking about, and now the news media has been saying that if President Trump comes back, we're going to have this inflation bomb. And knowing that we need the inflation bomb, could Trump be the scapegoat that it would be put in place? They already told us there's going to be an inflation bomb. Then they unleashed the inflation bomb to bring back balance in there. Could that be something?
I'm gonna push back on that.
Yeah.
I think that we're going to continue to have inflation. There was a summit this morning hosted by the ECB between Jerome Powell, the head of the Brazilian central bank, whose name I can't remember, and I probably couldn't pronounce it even if I did remember it, and Christine Lagarde. Okay. And Powell in his remarks had like he did with Lagarde at the Green Sea Summit back in early June before he use the 5 basis points to change the world when you push the RRP rate, the reverse repo rate, 5 basis points above the Fed funds rate. 2 weeks before that, he did that. He told everybody at the Green Sea Summit, look, I'm the head of the Federal Reserve. I have a dual mandate for stable prices and full employment. Climate change is not my thing. And Lagarde lost her mind and was angry. Well, I got news for you. This morning, my people all got a chance to watch this today. I didn't. I was actually busy doing other things. And all of my patrons were just watching this on CNBC and cackling as Powell just said, we don't see inflation coming down to below 2% until the end of 2026. Right. Which is a way of saying, dog whistling, oh, by the way, there are no rate cuts coming. Okay? If anything, there are rate hikes coming. Now, I believe that Powell
took it from a different angle, but go ahead.
But no, absolutely. I know the inflationistas want to believe that Powell's like trying to wiggle his way out of it. No, that was a clear signal. We are not going to cut interest rates because there is no need for us to do so. And moreover, he talked about the labor market. He said the labor market is yeah, it's not good, but it's not terrible. And he's like, we're going to go through the pain that's necessary. And Lagarde was absolutely bonkers mad. And then when she was asked a whole lot of hard questions that she couldn't answer, because, and then Goolsbee came out, the Austin Goolsbee came out and said this afternoon, well, if we measured inflation the way the Eurozone does, yeah, we'd be at 2%, but we don't. And it's already understated, in effect. Another way, when you listen to Fed people talk, you have to understand the bias in the speak. They're never going to tell you the truth, just like any politician, just like any hockey general manager. They always talk in platitudes, and you have to understand how to read what they say. It's like reading diplomatic cables, which, again, my friend Alexander Mercouris is far better at than I am. And that was a clear signal to everybody that Powell's not changing course unless he absolutely has to, and there's something that breaks within the U.S. financial system. We are not showing any signs whatsoever of that happening. What we're seeing is continued movement by Janet Yellen to attempt to do yield curve control through the Treasury Department. She just did a POMO thing this afternoon and bought back a bunch of treasuries maturing in 2036. So what's she doing? She's buying the long end of the curve and she's selling the short end of the curve. That's her yield curve control. She's been selling twos and buying tens, or biasing the market in terms of buying and selling twos and tens for 2 years now in order to keep the long end of the European yield curve from blowing out where it belongs. Because Lagarde needs the German 10-year to stay around 1.6 to 1.8% below that of the U.S. 10-year. So if we start getting a bear steepener trade in the U.S. yield curve, Lagarde is absolutely screwed in every way, manner, shape, and form. Because at the same time, that's going to put downward pressure on the euro, which is then going to feed back into oil prices, and they're going to have inflation come back like you would not believe in Europe, and she's going to look like a complete and utter idiot, which she is.
Yeah.
She is a political animal. She's not an economist. She was placed in power in order to affect a particular policy because she's ruthless, and she's good at it. But she's also a moron when it comes to she's going to fight like the world's bond traders. I mean, I already know that the central banks are like try to move all the markets all the time. Fine. But at some point, markets are stronger than that. And what I think is the following, to go back to your point about inflation. I'm not saying we're not going to continue to have inflation. We are. As a matter of fact, inflation, we're going to have another round of it. It's going to show up in energy prices and then move forward. Why? Because the Biden administration has run out of oil to sell out of the SPR to manipulate oil prices. I did a podcast with a young man named Ben Kelleran recently. We went over the state of the oil industry, and he brought up to me the importance of the fact that the United States has changed the definition of what constitutes a barrel of oil in terms of weekly oil production statistics, meaning they're more biased now towards natural gas and natural gas liquids than actual crude oil. So the United States is still nominally producing 13 million barrels of oil a day, but a lot lower proportion of that is actual crude oil. Okay, so that's biasing the mind. That's, again, management and perspective economics to bias Brent crude traders and WTI crude traders. Now, Brent is sitting here, opens up Q3, and immediately pushes towards $87 a barrel, while the euro is struggling to maintain 107. All of these things together point to the exact same problem. You have that, and you have political unrest in Europe. You have the Brits going to the polls tomorrow. You've already got the French going in the midst of an election. Like, the fiction that German bunds are less risky than American treasuries is ludicrous. It's bald-faced ludicrous on the face of it. And the only reason we still accept it is because everybody other than Powell, and to a lesser extent the Bank of Japan, have been lining up to prop up this failing system known as the euro. And Maybe they're doing it for their own reasons. Maybe that's why the Riksbank, in Sweden cut interest rates. I know why the Swiss National Bank cut interest rates because the Bundesbank told them to. Okay, but when you see it this way, you can't unsee it. And I think the way out of this in the long run is a Trump restoration, and that's again still a coin flip as to whether he makes it to January 20th or whatever, and a reworking of the Federal Reserve Board or the Treasury Department such that gold gets remonetized. And that's what's coming. What's going to come is we are going to use the gold reserves as a means by which to bring the debt to GDP ratio down nominally. I want to remind everybody, 106%, that's nice pikers compared to what we did during World War II. We walked out of World War II with a 220% debt to GDP ratio and instituted Bretton Woods.
We were also on a equity-based monetary system and not a debt-based monetary system.
Well, kind of. We were. Yeah, exactly. We were on a gold-based monetary system where gold was trading around the world at $35 an ounce, which was a complete lie. So what happened? Overpriced dollars relative to everybody else went out into the world to rebuild the world after World War II, which is actually what built the American empire. It's what killed our trade deficit with Europe, killed our trade surplus with Europe. It caused the gold window to be closed in 1971. It was brilliant. It was an actually brilliant long-term play by the European globalists to suck all the capital back out of the United States back into Europe. And it's worked perfectly. And they thought they were going to be able to then keep control of the Federal Reserve and keep LIBOR in place and keep pricing dollars to their advantage as opposed to ours and eventually take us over. And we said no. And that's where we are. And then, now it's just a matter of fighting as to who's going to win. Because if we don't do this, Mark, and this is the last point, and I'll turn the microphone back over. If we don't do this, the BRICS are going to do it anyway, and then we're screwed. And then we're going to be forced to do it. So we can either lay the ground foundation for it today, getting rid of Chevron, getting rid of the SEC's ability to getting rid of all of this stuff, and then going to Judy Shelton's gold-backed treasury bonds, or gold-backed tips, basically, her plan, which is what Trump wanted to do back in 2017 and got blocked by Kamala Harris and John McCain, who high-fived on the Senate floor to block her nomination to the Federal Reserve Board. I've talked about this many, many times. If that's what's in process, it's out there. Shelton's already talking about this. Like, no, not 2024, 2026, we're going to do this. Like, the evidence, the circumstantial evidence is all there that this is all going to get done. Because if we don't do it, when mBridge gets turned on and the BRICS institute the unit and all this other stuff, once that happens, they're not going to be able to hold the gold price down. The gold price is going to go to $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 an ounce over the course of the next decade. And that is going to change our relationship of the size of the Fed's balance sheet relative to its hard asset pool. And I firmly believe that we'll wind up in some kind of negotiated settlement and the world breaking off into blocks and domestic versus international versions of the currencies, similar to the yuan. Everybody's going to go to the yuan model by the time this is over, by the way. I mean, the Europeans are the ones who are desperately trying to stop this from happening because they understand that forcing the world into an open capital account with them controlling the primary central bank that issues the reserve currency is their superpower. They ran it with the Brits, they ran it with us, and they want to run it with Europe through the IMF and the UN, and it's not going to happen. The BRICS have already walked away from this in the United States, and there are powerful forces within the United States that are setting things up to walk away from this as well. And all that has to happen is we get political control over the United States and we stay out of World War III. Two big ifs.
Two big ifs. Two big ifs. That's interesting that you throw that out there. And I want to have you walk us through mechanically how that would work. But just to kind of set the stage for this, you mentioned that we're either going to do it first or we're going to do it later. And so, kind of set the stage for this. I've been following Luke Grauman's work for a long time, and he talks about this quite often. And
he does.
And basically, what we're seeing is this is already happening through, and especially with the big news about Saudi Arabia and whatever, the end of the petrodollar, whatever it is that they're doing. Certainly moving to this mBridge product, the CBDC bridge, if you will, which circumvents the entire dollar SWIFT system, the correspondent banking system, all these things. Why people say the dollar can't be replaced? Well, it can't be replaced easily because of the correspondent banks and the SWIFT system, but we could just build a new system that doesn't require that, and that's sort of what this mBridge is. But what China's doing is then allowing, say, Saudi Arabia to trade in yuan and then recycle those surpluses into gold through their gold markets. And that's what's pushing the gold price up in the Shanghai markets, et cetera, right?
There's a lot to unpack. And for those of you who have not followed the stuff that Vince Lanci and I have done, Vince and I over at VBL's Gold Fix have done a series of podcasts on my podcast going over a lot of these things. And so I've got hours of content trying to explain this stuff in mechanical terms, and we're not going to be able to unpack that all here.
Let's just talk more mechanically as to what the U.S. what it would look like for the U.S. to actually remonetize gold. What would that look like?
Right. Well, it would look like the way I just described it, which is that Shelton's argument is that, look, we can offer a treasury bond redeemable in a certain percentage of gold or completely in gold. And it could be a 30 or 50-year TIPS. It doesn't have to be a 5 or a 2. That would be insane. That would bankrupt the country. But you offer a long-dated treasury redeemable in treasury gold, either a 5% or 10% or 100% or whatever. I don't know what the market is going to demand of us. Okay, I don't care about that. I just know that if you offer a 2% nominal coupon, or even in Shelton's argument, you don't even offer a coupon. You just say, look, we're going to give you gold. It's a promise to pay you gold. I don't think that would fly with the market. I think you've got to offer at least a small dollar-based coupon payment to give people the cash flow that bond investors would want, and then some kind of gold cover clause at the back end, so that when you redeem the bond, you can take you give the government $10,000. And say 10% of it is convertible into gold at maturation. Okay, great. That means you're going to get $9,000 back and $1,000 worth of gold. But at the same time, the price of gold will have risen. When you execute the contract, you're going to get X amount of gold back at current prices. You're going to get that at the end. So if $1,000 of gold is roughly, say, 0.4 ounces, right? Then you're going to get 9 grand back plus 0.4 ounces of gold, regardless of what the gold price is. The gold price could be $20,000 an ounce at that point, right? And so that adds to your effective bond yield. You get, say, a 1 or 2%. Say you get a 2% coupon rate in dollars, payable in 10% gold after 30 years, in actual gold today. So you're selling the gold, right? Unless, of course, you call those bonds in, after you've repaired the balance sheet. And how do you repair the balance sheet? You repair the balance sheet by allowing the price of gold to go from $2,400 an ounce to $24,000 an ounce. That's how you do it. And you incentivize everybody to do it. So guess what? The Chinese are going to do this. The Chinese have a massive shit pot of gold. So do the Russians, by the way. So do the Turks. So do the Indians.
And they're already doing it. It's in process.
Right. And they're going to settle their internal trade through mBridge and the unit with a 40% gold back. The unit is going to be 40% gold back. 40 freaking percent. Not 4% like it is in the United States, or 0% as it is in Canada or in the UK, or 5% as it is in the EU. And I'm using that coverage rate versus M2, by the way. What I'm saying is that, or even the Fed's balance sheet, doesn't really matter. They're kind of similar. So they're going to be at 40%, meaning what they're going to use the unit for is it's not going to be a currency. No one's going to trade in units. They're going to trade in rupees and yuan and rubles and dirham and Saudi reals and all the rest of it. But they're going to settle through mBridge their trade in units, and they're going to note their trade balances, and their accounting will be done, and it'll just be a blockchain ledger, just like a blockchain. Actually, that's all a blockchain actually is anyway. It's just a ledger, and so that's how they'll settle up their trade balances versus their trade deficits, maybe on a quarterly or annual basis if they need to. So at the end of a year, India owes Russia 50 tons of gold. And then 50 tons of gold gets on a friggin' ship or a plane and goes and gets sent to Moscow. But they don't settle up on a daily basis with this. Okay. And then it's in India's best interest at that point to, if they don't want the gold to leave, to invest in Russia in such a way that the ruble internal trade is closer to balance. And it's going to enforce a kind of trade discipline that we should have. And they're going to do that. It's happening. Now, in order for that to happen, they will need a lot more liquidity in the gold market than they currently have. $2,400 an ounce is not enough. Right. Even if the Chinese actually own that 20,000 tons that Jim Rickard says they've had, or the Russians have 20,000 tons, which I believe. I'm not disagreeing with Jim here. Even if all of that's true, they still need, a 3 or 4x the gold price. In the West, especially in Europe, I don't think the Fed is fighting the gold price anymore. Okay, I don't think Mr. Slammy works in New York anymore. I think he works in Frankfurt. Okay, and I'll tell you why. You're talking
about Jerome Powell? Jerome Powell?
No, well, Mr. Slammy being the guy who comes in and beats on the price of gold, beats on the price of silver. My friend Eric Young on Twitter calls him Mr. Slammy. Okay. And I think it's hilarious, and it's a great description, but where, all of a sudden, 60 million tons of silver drop on the market in 5 minutes, that's Mr. Slammy. Right. Mr. Slammy used to show up at 8:30 like clockwork in New York during the last gold bull market, and certainly during the Bernanke-Yellen year. That's a great Freudian slip there. Yeah. I'm sorry. So the Bernanke-Yellen years, I'm going to use that from here on out. Mr. Slammy would show up at 8:30 like clockwork. Like during the Asian trade, gold would be up. It would be kind of wander around during the European trade. No one really cared. And then 8:30 would come in, and the gold price would get bombed on whatever reason. It would get bombed. And as Bill Murphy and the GATA guys, Bill Murphy and Chris Powell, worked out during that entire time, they published a paper after the last gold bull market that if you bought the New York Open and sold the New York close from the beginning of the gold bull market to the peak in 2011, you had lost 70% of your money, even though gold went up 600%, because that's how powerful the New York bearish internal daily trade was. Now I'm seeing that same trade starting at 3 a.m. What's 3 a.m.? Well, 3 a.m. New York time is Europe. It's the European Open. 3 or 2 o'clock is the European Open. And then you see gold. You see U.S. Treasury bonds get bid. You see all sorts of hinky stuff happening. And then 8:30 happens. The New York markets start to open. Gold and silver catch a bid. Oil catches a bid. People start selling treasuries again. And they're like, what in the hell is going on here? It's clearly Lagarde running and others running an operation. They're Mr. Slammy. Now, this is not to say that at particular times during the month, end of the quarter, end of the month, when options on OPEX and futures options on futures expiration, that Mr. Slammy doesn't come out in New York. He does, but it's not the Fed anymore doing it. It may be a bullion bank that's in trouble. It may be BOFA. It may be JP Morgan, but it's not the Fed. The Fed is setting everything up for a return of a remonetization of gold. They're going to allow the price of gold to rise a couple $100 here, and then it'll go up $200 and then down 100, and then up $200 and down. And you see this is what's happening. China is the demand out of China is enforcing a massive arbitrage on a daily basis between Shanghai price and the New York and the London price, anywhere from $5 to $30 on any given day. If that doesn't close, that's because they can't source the physical gold. My friend Vince Lacci has gone about at length on multiple podcasts. Not just mine, but Arcadia Economics, Palisades Gold Radio. Vince has been doing the rounds. He's been doing a great job. So understanding the mechanics of this, the Fed, I don't think, wants a lower gold price anymore. They're not trying to worry. They're not worried that the dollar is being embarrassed by a rising gold price. They're actually worried about the dollar rising too far too fast while they hold interest rates high. because it's setting up capital inflight into the United States. So letting the gold price rise actually helps blunt and allow the strengthening of the dollar to happen, which has been happening, to happen more manageably. At the same time, so if that's happening over there, who's the one that doesn't want a rising gold price? Europe. Why? And and Europe should want the exact same thing because they've got 12,000 tons of gold. They've got an unsustainable debt situation. Their central banks are all underwater. They should want the same thing the Fed does, but they don't. And the reason they don't is because they are truly the colonialist powers of old that they've always been. Listen to them politically, Mark. This is so very important. They're the ones pushing for war with Russia. They're the ones putting the Estonian prime minister in as the top diplomat who wants Russia destroyed, humiliated, and broken up into 200 countries. They put Ursula von der Leyen, the old freaking Nazi, kept her in charge. Why? All the warmongers are in Europe. They're the ones all pushing to create a new, effectively, like Maginot Line on the eastern border between Poland and Belarus and Ukraine. They're the ones pushing for this. They're the ones trying to put as many tripwires in place, including the Brits, in place in order to force NATO and the U.S. to come to their aid after they picked a ground war with Russia. Why? Because they expect the United States to come in, beat Russia, and then they get to run the exact same plan that they ran after World War I and World War II, which is if you keep the price of gold down and you humiliate Russia, then you can impose unbelievable reparations on them. Listen to what they say. Russia has to pay for the rebuilding of Ukraine. Russia has to pay for this. Russia has to pay for this. Russia is wrong. Russia is going to pay. It's no different than what fucking Churchill did after World War I, and it's no different than what we did with Bretton Woods after World War II. You after the war is over, you reestablish the market rate of gold at the pre-war rate and then impose reparations on the aggressive country, the beaten country that has forced to pay back in overvalued currency relative to their gold. It's exactly why they want to set this up. So they don't want the gold prices $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 an ounce. Russia would be able to pay those reparations even if it lost the war.
Yeah.
They wanted it $2,000 an ounce because they want Russia to pay.
Yeah.
And they have not given up this dream of extending their colonial rule into the 21st and 22nd century. This is how they believe that they're going to beat us and impose all of this stupid CBDCs and all the rest of this, their minority report with more Germans. They're convinced of this. It's still up on the Gantt chart at fucking Globalist Central. It's sitting here right there, and you watch them every day run the Gantt chart. And they don't realize that they're losing, going all the way back to what we talked about at the beginning of this conversation. So that's the layout. And now we just talk about, how they're going to lose, because they are going to lose.
Well, we're certainly seeing kind of back to the points that we both made earlier about sort of the rise or globalism starting to crack, starting to fall apart, the WEF, Klaus Schwab starting to fall apart. And really all across the world, we see this, whatever, I hate these labels, but for using their terms, this right-wing wave, so to speak, sure. Right? Where basically the people, populism, whatever you want to call it, nationalism, they're done with the immigration. They're done with these environmental things. Like the people are just done with this. So the appetite is changing really quick, and they can't get the censorship in fast enough to kind of quell that, if you will. I want to kind of start wrapping this up, but let me just ask another question. So that's an interesting take, and I love it. So remonetizing gold, the U.S. may want to do that because they realize it's inevitable, which we've already discussed, and I agree. It's already happening. And even if Russia goes down, it doesn't stop China and the BRICS from doing it. Although, potentially taking down Russia puts China. If they take China down, if they take Russia down, they kind of put China in their place. Maybe that might be a goal.
That is their thinking,
right.
And I will say that. And moreover, because I know this is primarily a Bitcoin podcast, and I want people to understand. I already believe that Bitcoin is a tool of the Federal Reserve, to underscore the SOFR and the Treasury market. If you listen really carefully, you'll realize that. Look, I always thought Tether was a scam years ago, but today I don't think Tether is a scam. I think Tether works for the Federal Reserve to liquefy the Bitcoin market, to create the kind of liquidity necessary to keep Bitcoin trading properly, and to provide a hot money sink and marginal flow into and out of the U.S. Treasury market. I think it's a very important thing. Tether now holds $110 billion with their U.S. Treasuries.
Yeah.
Haven't looked at Tether's market cap recently, but it's big.
Well,
and most of it is being held in short-term treasuries.
The U.S. dollar stablecoin is certainly a way to spread the strength of the U.S. dollar across the world. So a lot.
Or at least maintain it.
Well,
I would say maintain it. Let's
maintain it. Well,
I
mean, you have a lot of people in these countries dealing with high inflation that aren't able to get to actual U.S. dollars, but they can get to U.S. dollar stable coins. And so we're starting to see the U.S. dollar stable coins kind of filling in the blanks for where the U.S. dollars aren't able to get to. Sure. If you will, and then to the point that you're making, then those U.S. dollar stable coins then get parked in treasuries. Pretty good deal.
Yeah, well, actually, now that you say that, Mark, that's actually a really, really good point. And I'm glad you brought it up because it just popped into my head. Oh, that's what the international version of the dollar is going to look like. It's going to be Tether.
Yeah.
The domestic dollar is going to be the dollar that you and I use on our daily basis. And eventually we're going to wind up with some version of Tether being the international.
The euro dollar.
Yeah,
the new euro
dollar. The euro dollar. But it's going to be completely out of control of City of London.
Yeah. So just kind of going back to this. So in order for this to work, in order for the U.S. to sort of preempt this move, remonetizing gold, like I said, it's already happening. Does the U.S. want to do it before or after is kind of the question. And so I think in order for this to work out the way that you're kind of framing it, then Trump has to win.
Yeah.
If the Democrats are able to hold on to power, and to frame it up and putting words in your mouth, but from our previous conversations, some of the people inside the U.S. government are part of the Eurozone. So the Biden administration, right? And so the goal of the Eurozone with the Biden administration is to keep the Democratic Party in power. If Trump gets into power, then you think this remonetization of gold happens. If it doesn't happen, then this all starts to fall apart.
Well, what will happen then is that the country will have to break up, and then they win anyway. Because then what they get is a fracturing of the U.S. Treasury market. Who's responsible for the debt if Florida and Texas and all the states in between leave?
Well, the red states are going to all be looking good, and the blue states are all going to be bankrupt.
Well, but that's the point. And if you're just to use the phrase that everybody loves, if you're a Eurotrash shitbag communist and you don't want capital to flee Europe under this scenario where the European Union is failing politically and financially and morally and culturally and every other way, and that's your job and that's your goal and that's what's up on the Gantt chart at Global Essential, well, then the ultimate target is the U.S. Treasury market. How can you continue to push? How can you continue to undermine the validity of the U.S. Treasury bond and guarantee the coupon payments? Because the United States has, I've said it many times, what's the United States superpower? We've never defaulted on our debt. Well, I don't count the Revolutionary War debt. Sorry, I'm not going there. But in modern times, we've never defaulted on our debt. Europe's defaulted on their debt many times. The British have issued consuls. They've all done it. They've all changed the government and said, that's it. We're done. We don't honor those debts anymore. Whereas,
not counting 1971, obviously.
No, I'm not, because we didn't default on our debts. We just decided to not pay them in dollars or pay them in gold. U.S. Treasury. We're talking about Treasury bonds. Right. We have never defaulted on our Treasury bonds. We've always paid the coupon payments. Okay. Now, whether the currency was what the currency was redeemable in, and what those current Treasury bonds meant, and what they were actually claims for, well, okay, fine, fair. You can argue that point, but we've always, from a market player perspective, we've always paid our debts. Now, if you break that trust with the market, it's never coming back. In the current situation, with the current clown world thing happening on Capitol Hill and all of this stuff, it's never coming back. So that can't happen, and that's why they've pushed this secession arguments, why they push this irreconcilable differences argument on us. And I got news for you, dude. This is no different than what they did in the 20 years leading up to the war between the states, or what we down here in the South like to call the recent unpleasantness. Okay? This is what the British and the French did. They manipulated the frickin' board to get the South and the North to see themselves as mortal enemies when they were the ones doing it. And they were the ones with the treaties signed behind everybody's back and how they were going to carve the South up and everything else. It was obvious what they were trying to do. And it should be just as obvious to people today. When you see what they did, go back and look at that, what was going on back then, and you'll see the exact same thing happening today. And, it's who they are. It's what they've always done. Their history on this is very clear, very clear. And, it's how they operate. It's how they color. If we have the superpower of having never really defaulted on our debt, I'll qualify with really. And we have the best legal system for starting a business, i.e., we're the best offshore tax haven in the world still, right? And all of those things, right? If you undermine all of that stuff, then we lose all of our superpowers. Well, what's Britain's superpower? The color revolution. They've been doing it for 300 years, folks.
I thought that was a U.S. superpower, but we got it from Britain.
No. That is the lie. The British have been doing this for 300 years. They taught it to us. They've been doing it forever and a day. Go back through British history. It's so unbelievably clear. Yeah. The British perfected the color revolution model. They sold it to us, and now we, as conscientious Americans who are ashamed of what our country has become, have grafted that shame onto our own country, forgetting the fact that, yes, that's absolutely correct, and you should feel shame for what we've become in many ways. But we don't have to go there. And that we didn't do. We're not blameless, but we can reform. We know what to do. The Constitution is still the law. The Supreme Court just gave us a whole bunch of decisions that took power away from the administrative state.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Now, are you going to put your big boy pants on and get the work done, or are you going to sit and complain about it? That's my point.
Yeah. So we have globalism is cracking apart. We see it from many standpoints. It's even shifting inside the United States as well. And the U.S. either is going to return to gold before or after the rest of the world. And if that doesn't happen because of Trump losing the White House, or let's just say the Democrats holding on to power, then civil war becomes the next probable step.
Then some form of dissolution of the U.S. as a 50-state compact is on the table. Yeah. Yes, sadly. So, and nobody wants that. Nobody should want that. Yeah. No matter how much of a narco-libertarian you are at heart, and I'm one of them, I know you are. Yeah. Like, at some point, you want the move towards decentralization of capital markets, you want the restoration of individual rights and sovereignty and consumer sovereignty and all of these things. You want these things to happen, but they have to happen in a particular order. And, they have to be done in such a way that they do no harm. I remind everybody that when Ron Paul ran for president in 2008 and 2012, he's like, we're not going to get rid of Social Security tomorrow. We're not going to get rid of Medicaid tomorrow. Right. We made promises to these people, and we're going to hold to our promises. But we're going to also promise to sunset these things and get rid of them and restore a constitutional republic, sound money, decentralized power, and what the quote-unquote founders gave us as our birthright.
Yeah.
They didn't give us anything. They just produced a canvas on which we were supposed to maintain it.
Yep.
As Ben Franklin said, what was birth today? A republic, if you can hold on.
If you can keep it. All right. Well, let's wrap it up with that, Tom. Always such a fun conversation, wealth of information. I remember on one of your podcasts, I forget the name of your guest, but you were going deep into London and the UK and their tentacles that they've had into Canada and the US a long time ago. It was mind blowing to me.
Richard Poe.
Okay, Richard Poe. So for everybody listening, if you want to go deeper into these things, check out Tom's podcast, Gold, Goats, and Guns. A ton of good information on all this stuff, so you can have a better understanding and a different lens to sort of view the world through. We're going to link to all his stuff in the show notes down below. And with that, Tom, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks so much.
Thanks, man. It was good talking to you. Good catching up with you as always. Enjoy.